In an encounter no one could have imagined, Hollywood legend Robert Downey Jr. came face to face with President Ibrahim Traoré, and what unfolded left the world stunned. Overcome with emotion, Downey Jr. was moved to tears after Traoré shared words so profound that even the cameras seemed to pause. It was living proof that kindness and truth can break through even the toughest armor, even in the biggest stars. It all began on a quiet Monday morning in Los Angeles. Downey Jr., exhausted from a late-night shoot, almost ignored the buzzing of his phone. He wasn't in the mood for anyone, but something about the unknown number flashing across his screen made him swipe to answer. "Hello," he muttered, his voice groggy. On the other end came a warm, steady voice. "Good morning, Mr. Downey. This is Ibrahim Traoré, president of the transition of Burkina Faso." Robert sat up straighter, his confusion sharpening. "The president?" "Yes, I know this is unexpected," Traoré replied, his voice carrying a faint smile. "But I'd like to invite you to my country this week. There's something important I want you to see and hear." Robert's brow furrowed. Why him? Why now? At last he asked the only question that made sense. "Why me?" After a long pause, Traoré answered softly. "Because you still believe the world can change. And I need you to witness something that might just change you." For reasons he couldn't explain, Robert's heart skipped. By nightfall, his flight was booked, and by Wednesday afternoon, he stepped off a small jet into the sweltering Ouagadougou. Sun. The air smelled of dust, spice, and something warm he couldn't quite name. A sleek black SUV waited on the tarmac, and beside it stood Ibrahim Traoré in crisp fatigues, his presence commanding yet calm. Robert had expected a stern, distant politician, but the man before him was nothing like that. His eyes were kind, though weighted with stories untold. "Mr. Downey," Ibrahim said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." Robert clasped it firmly, still trying to read him. "Call me Robert. So, what is it you wanted to show me?" Traoré only offered a faint smile. "All in good time. But first, you must see my people. You must feel what they feel." As the SUV pulled away, they drove through streets alive with motion, markets spilling over with color, the hum of trade in the air, children running barefoot and waving joyfully as the car passed. But then the SUV turned a corner into a neighborhood, scarred by poverty, where houses leaned against one another like weary men. And yet, even there, laughter echoed through the air. Robert sat in silence, his chest tightening, unsettled by something he couldn't quite name. And still, the real story hadn't even begun. That evening, Ibrahim brought him to a small, dusty village beyond the capital. The sun dipped low, splashing the horizon with gold and purple. Dozens of villagers gathered, curiosity flickering in their eyes at the sight of the Hollywood star. Children giggled shyly, ducking behind their mothers, peeking out with wide smiles. Robert lifted a hand in an awkward wave, returning their warmth. Then his gaze froze. A little girl, no older than 6, stood barefoot on the hard earth in a faded yellow dress. But it wasn't her poverty that pierced him. It was something else entirely. It was her eyes, big, round, and carrying a quiet sorrow far too heavy for a child. "She lost her father last month," Ibrahim murmured beside him, as though reading his thoughts. "He was killed defending this village from an attack." Robert swallowed hard, his gaze locked on the little girl who clutched the hem of her faded yellow dress, still staring at him. Almost without thinking, he crouched down, extending his hand with a gentle smile. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and placed her tiny fingers into his palm. Robert's throat tightened as an unexpected wave of emotion surged through him. He couldn't know then that this little girl would change everything. That night, after meeting her, Robert lay restless in the modest guest house Ibrahim had arranged, staring at the slow spin of the ceiling fan, his mind replaying her eyes again and again. Her eyes lingered in his mind all night, deep, sorrowful, yet somehow still glowing with hope. By morning, Robert was exhausted, but when Ibrahim arrived, early, and said, "We have somewhere important to go today," he simply nodded. They drove for over an hour in silence, the city giving way to scattered homes and rough, dusty roads. At last, the SUV stopped before a small school. Its walls were chipped, the windows cracked, but inside, the sound of children's laughter rang out. Ibrahim's voice lowered. "This school was attacked just 3 weeks ago. Many of these children lost parents that day." Robert's chest tightened. He watched as barefoot kids played with tattered toys, their smiles defying the weight of their loss. "And still," Ibrahim added softly, "they come every single day." When the children noticed the visitors, they rushed out, surrounding Robert, tugging at his sleeves and giggling. He managed to smile, but inside he was breaking. "Why do they still smile?" Robert whispered, shaken. Ibrahim placed a steady hand on his shoulder and led him toward a plain concrete building nearby. "This is why I asked you here," he said, his tone suddenly heavy. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by a faint crack of sunlight slipping under the door. In the corner, a young woman rocked a baby in her arms, her body swaying as though clinging to rhythm instead of hope. On the floor sat 3 boys, no older than 10, their eyes fixed blankly on the wall. Ibrahim's voice was low. They lost everything, their homes, their families, their dreams. Yet still, they rise each morning. Still, they hope. Robert knelt beside one of the boys, his voice tender. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Abdu." Robert forced a weak smile. "Hi, Abdu." The child finally lifted his gaze, and his quiet words sliced through Robert's heart. "I want to be strong like Papa. But Papa is gone now." The words hung in the air like a blade. Robert froze, tears welling until his vision blurred. He turned toward Ibrahim, who met his gaze with a solemn nod. "This," Ibrahim said quietly, "is what I live for, to guard the little hope they have left." Robert's throat tightened, his chest aching as the weight of it all sank in. Now he understood why he had been brought here. On the drive back to the city, silence filled the car. Robert stared out the window, watching the dry fields blur past, Abdu's words echoing endlessly in his mind. "I want to be strong like Papa." At last, Ibrahim broke the quiet. "Mr. Downey, hope is fragile here, but it still breathes. That is why we fight every day. Not for power, not for glory, but for them." Robert turned slowly, his voice cracking. "How do you keep going, after seeing all this?" Ibrahim's lips curved into a faint, sorrowful smile. "Because giving up would mean their suffering was for nothing, and I cannot allow that," Ibrahim said firmly. Just then, the SUV screeched to a stop. In the distance, a crowd of villagers had formed a tight circle, voices rising in panic, shouts, cries, the sound of grief. Ibrahim leapt out without hesitation, and Robert hurried after him, his pulse pounding. As they pushed through the throng, Robert's stomach dropped. There, on the ground, lay the little girl in the yellow dress, her small body limp, her eyes shut. He froze, heart clawing at his throat. "What happened?" he pleaded. Ibrahim knelt beside her, his own hands trembling as he listened to the villagers. "She fainted," one whispered. "No food since yesterday." Robert felt the burn of tears spill freely down his cheeks. In all his years, he had never felt so powerless. The little girl lay limp on the hard ground, her yellow dress clinging to her fragile frame. Robert's hands trembled as he bent down, helping Ibrahim lift her gently. "She needs help, now," he muttered, his voice breaking. The villagers stepped aside in silence as Ibrahim carried her swiftly toward the SUV. Robert climbed in beside them, his heart hammering as dust billowed around the speeding vehicle. He couldn't tear his eyes from her face, so pale, so still. Her eyelids flickered weakly, a faint whimper slipping past her lips. Robert gripped her tiny hand, whispering, Stay with us, sweetheart. Please just stay. Every second dragged like an eternity, until at last the SUV screeched to a stop outside a weathered, crumbling clinic. Doctors rushed forward as Ibrahim passed her into their arms, his jaw clenched, his eyes shadowed with worry. She hasn't eaten in days, he said grimly. She fainted suddenly, Ibrahim told the doctors as they carried the little girl inside. Robert stood frozen, helpless, his chest twisting. For the first time in years, he bowed his head and prayed in silence. Beside him, Ibrahim's voice came low and steady. This is our reality, every single day, and still, we fight. Robert swallowed hard, words failing him. The waiting room pressed down with unbearable stillness. Robert sat hunched forward, his head buried in his hands, while Ibrahim paced slowly, his boots dragging against the worn tiles. Each minute felt like an eternity until finally a nurse emerged, her face unreadable. She's stable, she said softly, but very weak. She needs food and proper care. Robert exhaled sharply, relief crashing into guilt like a storm. How? How can this happen? He whispered, his voice raw. How can a child go hungry like this? Ibrahim sat beside him, his eyes shadowed with sorrow. It happens, Ibrahim said quietly. To her, to thousands. Because we don't have enough. Because the world forgets us. Robert lowered his gaze, shame washing over him. I didn't know, he whispered. Ibrahim placed a steady hand on his shoulder. That's why I brought you here, so you would know. So you could witness what I see every day, the pain, the courage, the hope. Robert's eyes burned, his chest heavy. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly powerless. And yet, deep within, something began to shift. That evening, they drove back toward the village. The sky was aflame with orange and purple as the sun sank low. On the way, Ibrahim stopped at a humble roadside bakery, purchasing several loaves of bread. When they arrived, children swarmed the car, eyes wide with a hunger that was more than just for food. It was for comfort, for care, for a sign they hadn't been forgotten. Robert stepped out, 2 loaves clutched against his chest. Kneeling, he tore a piece and placed it gently into Abdu's hands. For the first time that day, the boy's face lit up with a smile, small but radiant. Around them, children ate hungrily, yet with gratitude, as if this simple bread were the richest feast in the world. Robert's chest ached as he watched, his voice trembling when he turned to Ibrahim. I've wasted millions on things I didn't even need, but this bread means everything to them. Ibrahim nodded slowly, his words soft but heavy. Yes, sometimes kindness is more powerful than money. Robert blinked against the tears in his eyes. Staring at the children's joy, he felt something inside him shatter, and something else, something long buried, begin to mend. That night, lying awake, he made a vow to himself. He would not leave this place unchanged, and he would not let the world forget them. That night, after the children had eaten and drifted back to their homes, Robert sat beside Ibrahim beneath a sky scattered with stars. The village was hushed, broken only by the faint rhythm of a distant drum. Robert finally broke the silence, his voice fragile. I don't understand you, he admitted. Ibrahim turned his gaze toward him, waiting. You see this suffering every single day, Robert continued, his throat tight. You walk into these homes, hear these stories, and yet you still keep going. How? Ibrahim's eyes caught the moonlight, steady and unshaken. My father used to say, he murmured, when a child cries from hunger and you hold even one piece of bread, you cannot eat it alone. This is not about me. It has never been. It's about them. Always them. Robert's chest constricted, a weight pressing down. I thought I understood pain, he whispered, his voice breaking. But I didn't, Robert whispered, his voice raw. Not like this. Ibrahim rested a steady hand on his shoulder. You're here now, he said softly. That's what matters. And in that still moment beneath the stars, Robert felt the walls around his heart begin to crumble. The next morning, Ibrahim approached him with a worn envelope pressed gently between his fingers. This, he said, his tone heavy with meaning, is what keeps me fighting. Robert carefully unfolded the brittle paper. Inside was a letter, the handwriting small and shaky. Dear President, my name is Mayam. I am 12. My father died trying to protect us. My mother cries every night. But I want you to know we still believe in you. We still believe you can make it better. Please don't. Give up. Please don't forget us. Robert's hands trembled as he read, the words slicing through him like a blade of truth. Tears blurred Robert's vision as he clutched the letter. She gave me that 2 weeks ago, Ibrahim said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of a promise not yet fulfilled. And she's still waiting for me to keep it. Robert looked up, his throat tight, words failing him. I don't even know what to say, he whispered. Ibrahim's faint smile carried both strength and sorrow. Then don't. Just help me keep fighting. Robert folded the letter carefully, as though it were made of gold, and in that moment, carved another silent vow into his heart. That afternoon, Ibrahim led him to Mariam's home, a one-room shack at the village's edge where she lived with her mother and 2 younger brothers. When Ibrahim entered, Mariam's eyes lit up instantly, but when she spotted Robert, she froze, uncertain. He lowered himself to her level, his voice gentle as a breeze. You're Mariam? She nodded shyly, her small hands twisting at the hem of her dress. Robert reached into his pocket and carefully pulled out her letter. I read what you wrote, he said softly. And you're right. He can't give up. Neither can I. Mariam's lips quivered, her eyes brimming with tears before she suddenly threw her arms around him. And in that instant, Robert Downey Jr., the Hollywood icon celebrated for his charm, wit, and unshakable screen presence, collapsed into raw humanity. He wept into her tiny shoulder, his body trembling as Ibrahim stood nearby, silent but with eyes shining. Because sometimes, even the strongest are reminded why they must keep fighting. And sometimes it is the smallest voices that ignite the biggest hearts. The very next morning, Robert and Ibrahim set foot in yet another village. This one quieter, heavier, as if grief itself lingered in the air. Children peeked timidly from cracked doorways. Women sat weaving mats in silence, their hands steady, but their eyes hollow. Not a single man moved through the village. Robert slowed, frowning. Where are the fathers? Ibrahim stopped, his jaw tightening as if the words themselves were too heavy. They're gone, he said quietly. Robert blinked, unsettled. Ibrahim's gaze shifted toward the horizon. Killed, defending this place, protecting what little they had. Most lie there now. He pointed toward a grassy mound at the village's edge, dotted with rough wooden crosses. Robert's throat tightened as he watched a boy, barely 5, straining to drag a bucket nearly bigger than himself. It's not fair, he whispered, his voice breaking. Ibrahim's eyes met his, heavy with truth. That's why you're here, so the world will finally know, so you can show them. Robert nodded, though his heart sank like stone. For the first time, he grasped that what these people carried wasn't just poverty. It was sacrifice carved into their lives, pain no child should ever inherit. And still, somehow, they endured. That afternoon, Ibrahim led him to a small hospital, on the city's outskirts. The moment they stepped inside, the sharp sting of antiseptic mixed with dust filled Robert's lungs. Rows of narrow beds lined the walls, each holding a child, some with arms wrapped in makeshift bandages, others lying still, eyes fixed on the ceiling as though hope had drained from them. A weary nurse hurried past with a tray of medicine rattling in her hands. Robert's stomach twisted. How do you keep this place alive? He asked, voice trembling. Ibrahim's reply was quiet, raw, barely, Not enough doctors, not enough hands, not enough of anything. Medicine, not enough of anything. But we do what we can. A little boy with a bandaged head lifted his tiny hand and waved weakly at Robert. Robert's chest tightened as he knelt beside him. "What happened to you, buddy?" he asked gently. The boy gave a faint smile and whispered, "Boom!" before mimicking an explosion with his small hands. The innocence in his gesture shattered Robert. His throat burned as he looked back at Ibrahim, eyes glistening. They deserve so much better. Ibrahim nodded slowly, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. Yes, but what they need most are people who care enough not to turn away. Robert inhaled shakily, realizing he was no longer just visiting. He was being transformed. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Ibrahim finally broke a silence he rarely shared. His voice was low, almost trembling. "My brother," he began, "died in my arms when I was 19, fighting to protect our village from an attack. He made me promise, never let our people be forgotten." Robert's breath caught, stunned into silence. Ibrahim's voice didn't waver, though his hand pressed firmly against his chest. "I carry him here. Every time I meet a child without a father, every time I see a mother's tears, I see my brother. I see my family." Robert's vision blurred, his throat. "Bro, I thought I knew strength," he whispered hoarsely. "But you're something else." Ibrahim shook his head gently, a sad smile flickering across his face. "I'm not a hero, Robert. I'm just a man. But if kindness and truth can save even one life, then I'll fight until my last breath." Robert wiped at his face, overcome by the weight of it all. That night, he lay awake, knowing he was no longer just a guest, he was a witness. And once you've seen the truth, you can never walk away the same. The final day of his visit came far too soon. That morning, Robert asked Ibrahim for one last stop, Miriam's home. When they arrived, she sat outside with her brothers, weaving strands of her mother's hair with careful hands. The moment she spotted them, her face lit up. Robert crouched down beside her, already blinking back tears. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he whispered gently. "But before I go, I need to tell you something." Miriam tilted her head, eyes wide. "I'm going to tell your story," Robert promised, his voice trembling. "And I'll make sure the world never forgets you, Abdu, or any of you." Her lips quivered before she threw her arms around him. "You're my hero now," she whispered. Robert's heart shattered. Shaking his head, he touched her cheek softly. "No, Miriam," he whispered back, tears streaming. "You're mine." Behind them, Ibrahim stood in silence, his chest heavy. He knew this moment would carve itself into Robert's soul forever, and it reminded him why he could never stop fighting. That evening, Robert and Ibrahim shared a quiet dinner. It was then Ibrahim finally revealed the truth that left Robert, and later the world stunned. Last year, Ibrahim began. "I was offered a chance to leave this life to live comfortably, far from all this suffering. But I couldn't because I promised my brother and because these people are my family." Robert stared at him wide-eyed. You chose to stay here?" he asked, barely believing it. Ibrahim nodded. "Yes, I chose them over myself, and I'd do it again, tomorrow." Robert covered his mouth, overcome. No one would have blamed Ibrahim for leaving, but he stayed because his heart wouldn't let him turn away. And in that instant, Robert realized something. Fame, money, and glory meant nothing compared to a single act of kindness. And the world needed to know this man's story because kindness and truth really could touch even the biggest stars. The next morning, the car was waiting to take Robert back to the airport. The entire village had gathered to see him off. Children ran to hug him. Mothers waved, wiping tears. Abdu handed him a small hand-woven bracelet. Robert knelt, his heart breaking all over again. "I'll never forget you," he promised, his voice shaking. Then Ibrahim stepped forward, embracing him like a brother. "You've seen our truth," Ibrahim said quietly. "Now help them see it too." Robert nodded through his tears. I will, he swore. As the car drove away, Robert looked back one last time, and for the first time in years, he wept. Not for himself, but for the people who had shown him what real strength looked like. That night, he posted a single message online. I met a man who reminded me what it means to be human. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, and I will never forget him. Neither should you. And the world listened. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and drop a comment sharing your feelings. Let's fill the comments with love and admiration for true kindness and strength, and show the world that compassion still matters.